Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Midday Live, a special edition. Are prisoners of war from the Southeast Asian conflict still being held as hostage? Well, there is a man who believes that story is true. He is the most decorated Green Beret commander in Vietnam history. He is also a former lieutenant colonel in the Army Special Forces. He also served as an intelligence officer in South and Central America during the same time that Manuel Noriega was the president of that country. His name is Bo Gritz. He joins us now here in the studio. Colonel Gritz, thanks for taking the time to be here. Explain to me, why do you think that Americans are still being held prisoner of war in Southeast Asia?
Well, Bill, it's not only my own personal experience as an intelligence officer working for the Intelligence Support Activity, the National Security Council, having been to Southeast Asia behind communist lines more than 10 times since 1982, 4 times knowing where prisoners of war were located. But it's also the report of our senior officials like the Defense Intelligence Agency Chief, General Eugene Tai. Even the U.S. Senate has come out with a study dated the 23rd of May, 1991 that says that more than 20,000 Americans from World War II, 5,000 from Korea, and thousands from Vietnam were taken into the Soviet Union and interned by the communists in Vietnam and Laos. 308 Americans were known to be captive in communist Laos. Now, Laos was a secret war, Bill. The U.S. Congress didn't authorize any money, but there are as many bomb holes there as there is in Vietnam. And we lost almost 600 missing in action in Laos. Not one was ever returned by the Pathet Lao government when the Vietnamese returned theirs. The premier of Laos said to Henry Kissinger, "Please let us negotiate for the tens of Americans that we're holding." Not one ever came home. So when you get John Kerry, who is the new committee chairman for the Senate Prisoner of War Committee, just formed in August of this year, saying, "I don't think there's anybody left there." Well, why aren't we asking the Pathet Lao, what about the 308 you held? Why aren't we asking the Vietnamese, what about the hundreds that you were known to have that didn't come home? Why aren't we asking the Soviet Union? Where are the thousands that are reported in the Senate's own study? So it's not just me, it's not just thousands of immigrant reports from boat people coming back. It's not the satellite photo that shows 30 American prisoners of war at Namarat, which is in Laos, and one of the reasons we crossed the river and went on a raid into Laos to rescue them. But it's the fact that I personally have gotten their photographs, their signatures. Their pictures are all over the papers today with Carr and Bora and Stevens and Robinson and the others. It's just time for America to wake up, face the truth. It's not America who's turning its back. It's our politicians. Cause the president to turn around and face this issue. Right now when Gorbachev has got a Nobel Peace Prize and is Man of the Decade for Time magazine, when they've gone belly up, why aren't we asking them? While the cameras of CNN are in La Blanca prison in Moscow, the most infamous KGB prison, why aren't we saying, oh, by the way, you want money from America? How about accounting for every prisoner that the Senate report says you have?
How could the United States government allow Americans to be held prisoner of war, held hostage? How could we? I mean, it boggles the mind for me to believe that my elected officials are actually allowing this to happen. It frightens me and it makes me angry simultaneously.
It started out in World War II. That Senate report says that 20,000 Americans were liberated by the Soviets on the Eastern Front from Nazi Germany, but they were never repatriated. Instead, that report says these 20,000 were taken back to the Soviet Union, put into the gulags, and then the Soviets wanted from Harry Truman, and then later Eisenhower, they wanted $6 billion in 1945 dollars. That's like 60 billion or more today in trade. Well, the Cold War was starting. We should have let Patton gone ahead. We wouldn't have this problem. But the Cold War was starting, and neither Eisenhower nor Truman wanted to deal with the likes of Gorbachev on those odds. And so they just classified those studies. Well, the same thing happened in Korea. So rather than let the Koreans have an ace up their sleeve, we just classified the studies and ignored their demands for reparations in return for prisoners. And in Vietnam, it's been the same thing. We didn't want to recognize the war in Laos. I commanded an army of Cambodians. The movie Apocalypse Now, Francis Ford Coppola wanted to use a photo in General William C. Westmoreland's book. It shows me kneeling in front of a lot of really mean-looking Cambos. And he wanted to superimpose Marlon Brando's face over mine. It's true, I commanded an army of Cambodians there. We were into denied areas. How did we pay for them? Because in Laos and Cambodia, the war was secret. Well, the CIA had an airline called Air America. We had a nickname, Air Opium. It was flying in tons of drugs. Many of the drugs went into the arms of the American fighting man. That's when America was overdosed. We were collecting in a slush fund money to pay for these covert operations. It's continued. When the war was over and Nixon said we're out with honor, that wasn't altogether true. We still had Phoenix assassination teams that we were paying using drug money to continue to fight the communists.
Well, let's continue our conversation on that. Let's look into the drug aspect of why American POWs might still be in Southeast Asia. Midday Live continues in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back to this special edition of Midday. We're talking with Lieutenant Colonel Bo Gritz, retired from the United States Army Special Forces. Now, Colonel, before we went into the break, you started talking about how drug money was being utilized by the Central Intelligence Agency, i.e. Air America, at the time during Southeast Asia to fund assassination teams. Now, are you trying to tell me that the United States government is actually involved in drug smuggling?
That's precisely what I'm saying. The proof is in Ollie North's diaries that were not shred. Lawrence Walsh, the independent prosecutor, revealed 500 entries where Ollie North said that illegal narcotics were being used to fund the Contra operations. When I commanded Special Forces in Latin America in 1976, George Bush was head of the CIA. We were running an Operation Watchtower down there then. The United States Army had low-level navigation radios from Bogota, Colombia, Turbo, Colombia, and Albrook Army Airfield. CIA contract aircraft at night flying below 500 feet would push them underneath the radar mask, and it was deadly. That's why we had to have the radio towers. Came through the Darien Mountains, and they were carrying cocaine. They made more than one flight a night. Manuel Noriega was the CIA's front man. They received the cocaine on an Army airfield where there was no customs. The money was laundered in the banks in Panama, and the cocaine flooded into the United States. When I made the suggestion that we eliminate this drug smuggler, Manuel Noriega, I was told by the chief cop in the United States Army Intelligence, General Harold Aaron, came down to Panama, because I'm pretty hard-headed. I got shot in the back of the head in Vietnam. The bullet bounced off. We don't wear steel helmets. In Special Forces, we wear those funny little green berets. He told me, he said, you keep your hands off of Manuel Noriega. He has immense value at the highest levels. Gosh, we could have taken him out, Bill, using a half A team, 6 men, about 15 minutes, not even missed a coffee break, and yet Christmas last, we ended up 22,000 paratroopers, billions of dollars, thousands of lives lost, and he sits in Miami being tried, and I think will probably end up as a neighbor to Saddam Hussein on the Riviera with about $10 billion in the bank as profit.
What happened when you went to the Army and said, well, wait a minute, this isn't right?
Well, I did exactly that, expecting an attaboy. For example, when I was training Mujahideen Afghans in '86, I was asked by the White House, the Vice President's office, to go into the Golden Triangle. I was the first U.S. agent ever to go in and come out alive from the inner sanctum of General Kun Sa, most heinous drug criminal the world's ever known. He pumped 3,050 tons of opiates into the free world last year. And when I got in there, he revealed the names of U.S. government officials who he said had been his best customer for more than 20 years. Well, with George Bush at that time leading the charge in the war on drugs, I thought we'd get an attaboy because we're going to reveal human sewage in our bureaucracy can be flushed. We'll have clean government. Hooray! I couldn't have been more wrong. The sky literally fell on me. When I came back with those names on videotape with Kun Sa's own testimony, people watching this show can see the videotapes for themselves, I was told to erase and forget, or I would hurt the government. I was told if I didn't erase and forget, that I would serve 15 years as a felon. I was told the government would bring hostile witnesses, aggravated charges. I told them to stick it up their kilt. I raised my hand to the square. I took an oath of allegiance to the United States and to the Constitution. To heck with my bosses. Do you know that they did try to prosecute me in Oklahoma for the Afghan training. But where do you get missiles, plastic explosives? You don't get them in the 7-Eleven.
Right.
The grand jury, God be praised, said no true bill, so there's nothing the government could do. In California, they tried to indict me for a violation of the Neutrality Act. I'm guilty. I've been behind communist lines 10 times since 1982, never once asked permission of the communists, in pursuit of U.S. prisoners of war. The FBI came to my rescue. They told Dwight Moore, the U.S. attorney there, Bo is a CIA intelligence officer. And the U.S. attorney said, I'm not going to get involved in some kind of tug of war between the executive branch agencies. They dropped the charges. I was charged in Nevada with using a false passport. It's a weenie charge. I've used them many times. I'm guilty. But I had no fear standing before the jury explaining the only reason I was being charged is because I wouldn't cover up the drug connection with the U.S. government executive branch and high-level officials.
When we come back on Midday Live, we will be talking with Bo Gritz about the names of the people in the federal government that he says are dealing in the drug trade. Stay with us as Midday Live continues. Welcome back to Midday Live. We're talking with Bo Gritz, a man who says that there are still Americans being held in Southeast Asia and that the government may even be involved in drug smuggling. Now, something interesting was happening. We were talking about it during the break. The U.S. Attorney's Office, when they were prosecuting you on the passport charge, now how is it they got word that you were using a bad passport?
Well, the National Security Council of the White House knew precisely what passport I was on. My name at that time was Patrick Clark. And I've had many passports, many names. That was just the one I was using then. I had clearance from the U.S. Customs to come in on that passport. And so they used that as part of the threat when they said, we will bring hostile witnesses against you, aggravated charges, if you don't agree to erase and forget. I was told I was going to hurt the government if I didn't. Right. I asked them, whose government? Not the government my dad died for in World War II. And I was told, look, Bo, nobody wants to hurt a war hero. If you will just erase and forget, there won't be any problems. If you continue to press this issue, we'll bury you.
I was hearing an interesting story from some of your entourage that travels around with you that even one of the U.S. attorneys said that President Bush called him personally?
Well, you know, I'm a Christian, and I believe that the Holy Spirit can put thoughts in people's minds. Now, lawyers are supposed to be smarter than this, but the U.S. attorney appointed by the president, who personally prosecuted me in Nevada after I was acquitted of false passport charges, the media was gathered around him on the Foley Federal Building in Las Vegas steps, and they said, why were you prosecuting this man for 2 years when you had no real case? And he said, quote, it's right on videotape, anybody can see it for themselves, he said, quote, George Bush called me up and told me to get Bo Gritz. A member of the media was there and said, are you denying that? Is that what you're saying? Trying to help the U.S. attorney extract foot from mouth. And the U.S. attorney said, no. This is quote, no, what I'm saying is George Bush called me up and told me to get Bo Gritz. Well, I just copied it off the television that night. Sure. I sent it on the VCR with a little yellow stickum to George Bush that said, if you did this, I think you did wrong. You subverted justice, or attempted to. And if you didn't, you got trouble. The guy you appointed U.S. attorney's lying about you. Well, they fired the U.S. attorney. We still don't have a guy that's a permanent U.S. attorney in Nevada. The current guy is being investigated, I think, for arson fraud. So, you know, a lawyer out there, Bill, needs a job, wants to move west, tell him to get in touch with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Before we went into the break, you were talking about how some American government officials, according to the man that you interviewed in the Golden Triangle in Burma, said that, that these American officials were involved in the drug trade. What are the names? Well, and again, I was there for prisoners. I'm almost ashamed to say this because soldiers have this, and I think sailors out here too, have this tunnel vision. We are told to do or die, never ask a question why. Sure. I was out there in Burma, the first U.S. agent ever to be in the Golden Triangle. Here I had Kun Sa, the most heinous drug criminal in the history of the world, and he had no prisoners. So I almost didn't ask him about the drugs. I was surprised when I did, with video cameras running. He said, U.S. government officials are my best customers. He said,